certainly one of the issues that we know in New Zealand is that we do have quite an ingrained and problematic drinking culture.
The socializing is a lot around alcohol, and I'm not in the habit of it.
Able to enter into what our responsibilities, sort of your and mine, are in being able to enter these spaces. Kia ora and welcome to Youth Talk with Voice of Aroha. I'm Rata, and I'm very, very excited to be chatting to Charlotte this evening. How are you doing, Charlotte?
I'm very well, thank you, Rata. I'm extremely excited to be in the Youth Talk this evening and to have some really stimulating discussions about a topic that we're both actually very passionate about.
You've hinted already at the passion and the excitement. Today, we're going to be chatting a bit about youth activism and advocacy within the refugee space, and especially focusing on, or I'd like to chat about and hear your opinions on, Charlotte, on how refugees themselves can kind of lead change and lead the narrative in those spaces, and how we're sort of seeing that. What are your thoughts?
I'm actually very passionate about this topic. I've been working with the refugee community since I was a high school student, and I had attended a very multicultural girls' school, Wellington East Girls' College. So even as a teenager, I saw the refugee community being very active within their own community. There was a group which was called the New Settlers Group within high school that was actually run by some refugee background adults from Somalia and Ethiopia, and they were actually helping the youth who have recently come as refugees settle into Wellington East and help give them a sense of identity and a sense of community, which they often didn't have, unfortunately, in the mainstream classroom. They were still quite marginalised because things like the topics that were discussed within school didn't relate to their lifestyle. It was still a very Eurocentric conversation. So that was the first example that I probably saw of refugee activism, and it was completely led by the refugee youth. So there weren't actually any teachers within the school, within the space. The space was designed for students by older students. They must have been university students at the time. So that really inspired me a lot to actually work within the refugee migrant community. I think I was the only Kiwi person going there as a friend of the refugee students, and they actually accepted me and let me belong and be part of their group. So it was really interesting to have a perspective with me being an outsider, but I felt very accepted. So we can have a really good discussion about some of these thoughts, but do you have any examples that you've seen within your own work, maybe your study at university or your work?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I joined Vic Without Barriers at Victoria University, and was set up in 2019 by refugee background students because they saw that gap in the area. And I think, especially when it makes sense in terms of lots of things. If you're trying to meet the needs of communities, it has to be communities leading that because they know their needs better than other people. That's really, really interesting to hear. It's the first time I'm hearing that. Thank you for sharing that, Charlotte, about your experience at school. I find it both really interesting that that it was led by non-school students, by older former students, but and it's both a strength and a gap that it was being led kind of in that group space by students, because obviously our education system doesn't have that built in terms of it, as you said, it was kind of providing this one-centered Eurocentric framework, and so there was a gap that was being met. But I think often we're sort of increasingly seeing these communities kind of stepping up and either carving out the space for themselves or creating it to try and make things better where there are challenges. But
exactly right, I completely agree. So I'm just reflecting on my education experience at Wellington East Girls College and thinking back to some of the challenges that a lot of my refugee background friends had. So we sat the NCEA internal assessments, but unfortunately they always took place around Ramadan when they were fasting. And it was really unfortunate because they were sitting exams without having eating or drinking anything since the early morning, and there was absolutely no recognition of that, and it would have put them at a disadvantage with the other students. And when I was an adult studying education papers around education policies, I realised what disparity that was, and it was actually really sad to see. Yeah, what were some of the experiences working with refugee background students and volunteering with them at Victoria?
They were really incredible. Before I'd love to answer that question, I
Sure.
was wondering if you could talk about, sorry, Charlotte.
Yes, all good.
About what changes did you see happen in the group at Wellington East Girls in terms of were there positive changes as a result of these refugee background students providing the space, or what did that look like from your experience?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So there were definitely positive changes within the refugee background community. These girls had come to New Zealand with, ever-changing and conflicting identities. So they were able to help each other through navigating the New Zealand system. So it was a struggle for a lot of them. A lot of their parents had come to New Zealand with little English. They were often working very long hours in places like taxi companies, cleaning, things like that. And it was hard because the students couldn't depend on their parents for academic help, which was a contrast to myself, who was able to have a lot of help from my family, even though I struggled with subjects like maths. But unfortunately for my friends, they didn't have that experience at all. So they really leaned on each other in order to provide support, and there was a real sense of community. Another thing that was youth-led was the Refugee and Migrant Homework Club that used to actually take place in the old building of ETC, English Teaching College, which is my workplace, which
Everything
was
coming full
amazing.
circle.
It was like coming full circle when I actually started there working with students. But that was a wonderful space where students were able to interact with other refugee migrant students, and it gave refugee background students a chance to volunteer and to be leaders within the school and to try to help the younger generation with their academic study, which is really important. So I think both of those two initiatives were very helpful within the school. It did make a positive impact, but honestly, I do feel like my high school should have done more. And it is disappointing to see how these students were kind of put in a group together. They kind of had like a label, the ESOL girls, and I was along with them. So I was the only New Zealand European within these group of girls, and unfortunately they didn't really have too many interactions with like other New Zealand European girls or other cultures like Maori and Pacifica. It was very divided. Unfortunately, Wellington East did stream students who had English as a second language. They would have something called ESOL English and ESOL Science, where they would be all together doing alternative NCA standards, which they didn't realise actually wouldn't set them up for university entrance. So it made it really hard when they were going to go to university, and they were never told that by the school. Their parents didn't know. So it was quite a challenging issue.
That's a really interesting one, because obviously in the kind of separation of these spaces, trying to meet specific needs, there can be, especially when we see that delivered structurally by the present systems that we've got in education and other places, when you're trying to meet those needs, what we often see, as exactly as you pinpointed, is an expectation that these people or these groups, and it's not just refugees, also lots of different groups, but expectation that in trying to help them meet their needs, that they will do worse, and then setting them up to get those outcomes that isn't favourable and isn't what they want. So that is really, really challenging.
Yeah, it is. What really disappointed me in my school were the school prize givings. I had some friends from Afghanistan, and they were very talented. They've done really well now. They're now based in Auckland. So they did very well, and I think it was maths and science, but they were never acknowledged in the prize giving. But my cousin, who was a New Zealand European student, she was always acknowledged because she was more academic, and I felt like it wasn't fair on my refugee friends, and I think they did realise that their success was never really celebrated by the school.
It was really, really lovely to have, huge challenges we bring up. It was really, really lovely to have Voice of Aroha had our academic awards evenings, both in Wellington and Palmerston North, to deliver that recognition of the success of refugee background youth.
I'm so happy to see that, because when I was in school, this didn't happen at all. I'm hoping that the prize givings now within high schools will be more reflective of everyone, but it's really hard to know, unfortunately. Yeah, so what were your kind of experiences looking into the university space? I'm very interested to hear about that.
I mean, I think similar to, as you've described, in terms of, structurally, the university, Victoria University of Wellington, obviously they offer some positive things in terms of we have a refugee support coordinator and things like that. But really, Vic Without Barriers came about because these students were seeing that there were needs that were not being met, and same kind of in a similar situation to your high school. Yes, but it was also such a and really is a story of strength in terms of when I joined in 2020 and kind of late 2020 after COVID, I mean everyone online and things like that. It looked to me like such a flourishing club in terms of there were these really powerful and strong leaders who were so committed to making change, and especially I think knowing the pains in the system and knowing how much it does disadvantage you. I think they were really passionate about making change, and it was also it was a situation where we're continuing to see really that awareness being created by the people who know all the different issues, and that awareness kind of continuing to come through, and especially challenging the narratives that we have. So like I've seen and been really lucky to be a part of in small ways some of the really joyous success and just awareness being created and advocacy for the Latin American community in Wellington, and just so she's lots of the executive members of the club for quite a while at Vic Without Barriers were all Colombian, so and getting to see the really beautiful festivals of Colombia and experience the food and the culture and things like that, but that was being created by them, and again challenging existing narratives and stereotypes around what people might have heard about Colombian people, might think about Colombia and stuff like that. And again, it's people going out of their way to carve out that space to really do the work of educating other people, I think, as well, in terms of educating, especially Pākehā in New Zealand, about what actually their culture is, rather than sort of being stuck in stereotypes and misinformation. So we're seeing a lot more of that, and I think the more that happens, the more that does empower other refugee background people, but especially youth, to sort of step up into that and tell their own stories. But again, there's so much pushback and misinformation around that is really challenging.
Yeah, that's a really important issue. It's still disappointing to see the divide between refugees and the general New Zealand society.
Absolutely,
I still do hear from my students, but they're not really getting the chance to interact with New Zealanders. And actually one of my main passions is trying to bridge the gap between New Zealanders and particularly international students, but also refugees and migrants as well. So all of those communities.
Do you have any thoughts on things that keep New Zealanders from interacting with refugee background students and international students, or...
So I actually did my research on that during 2018 when I finished my study at Victoria. So it was more around international students, but I do feel like the same can be applied to refugee and migrant students. Unfortunately, there were issues with language barriers, but also with lack of common ground. Some of my observations within the university culture as a university student at Victoria were that a lot of the events were focused around drinking alcohol, and unfortunately these were university-led events by youth, and that puts a huge barrier to Muslim community, but also to other places like maybe India and Sri Lanka, other cultures where alcohol is not the norm and maybe is something that isn't accepted, but women really do. And it just means that they're automatically excluded from those events. When I was a student, I was joining a club for exchange students and Kiwi students to interact. I tried to bring up this point and no one understood me. I felt like basically they didn't want to hear what I had to say about having events that didn't require alcohol. So that was probably one of the biggest barriers. Also, the problem is that New Zealanders may be brought up in Wellington, they may all go to university together and already have their own social connections and not really want to branch out. And that's really hard if you've come to New Zealand a year before as a refugee, because they may not let you into the social group, which is really sad to see, unfortunately.
I think two really, really interesting, quite different issues you've brought up there. It's actually really interesting about alcohol, and I'd never thought about that before. But I see that. I mean, certainly one of the issues that we know in New Zealand is that we do have quite an ingrained and quite a problematic drinking culture, and you can see that. I think you're completely right in terms of structurally at university, but also in workplaces. A lot of work, it's normal to have after work Friday drinks, and that's kind of part of the culture. And if you don't go along with that, then there's a little bit of and I mean there are different people sort of challenging that in one way or another, and it is a culture that probably should be challenged.
It really should be. Like, I think probably in all of the workplaces that I've been in, the socializing is a lot around alcohol, and I'm not in the habit of it.
Talking about our role in these spaces that we've been really generously been able to enter into, what our responsibilities, sort of your and mine, are in being able to enter these spaces.
Definitely.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, so it's so important that we realise that we are entering like another culture, and to be respectful, be mindful of differences within religion, but also realise that we are being shown hospitality. We're often being like welcomed into people's homes. Those cultures are very different, and just to honour that as well, and also to return the hospitality back. I've noticed with the refugee community, they are just so incredibly generous. Whenever I visited their houses, they have given me such wonderful food, they've given me such wonderful hospitality, and I always want to try to repay it. When I was volunteering with students, one student from Ethiopia, she gave me that injera bread, so I gave her some fruit back, so she was really happy. So that was really nice. What about your responsibilities? Do you have any comments around that?
I completely agree in terms of there is almost definitely an imbalanced level of I'd actually say an imbalanced level of aroha in terms of the generosity, inclusivity, acceptance that is really offered by these refugee communities, and especially as a Pākehā person kind of entering into these spaces. I think particularly for myself, I keep in mind just that I don't know their experiences, and really being mindful of the gap between what I see and experience and just everything that I don't know in terms of being aware that whilst I might have heard some stories and met some really lovely people, that's not where the experience ends, and that's not where the conversation ends. And really the best thing that I can do in a lot of situations is just to listen, actually to learn enough to ask the right questions, but to know that I'm not the one whose voice really needs to be amplified in these situations, and being able to be in those spaces is a gift and certainly not an entitlement. And I think especially because refugee background people have so much to offer in terms of wisdom and deep sort of cultural ritual and religious understanding. They've just got so much to offer. It really is. It's the blessing of people in Aotearoa, I think, to experience that, and sort of rather than the other way around. I think it's our huge opportunity to get to hear those voices and to hear those stories be shared. But just, I guess, keeping in mind that everything I experience is a gift and not and certainly not the full picture.
Exactly right.
You can never know the full story. So
you summarised that perfectly. I actually have a cooking book in my house called Lift the Lid Off the Cumin Jar, which is stories of refugee people who are cooking for their families, and it says in the book that there are some gaps within these stories, and there are some things that we don't know, and they may not be willing to share, and just respecting that. Like in my high school with my Afghani friends, there were things that I didn't know about them, about their family, but I chose not to ask and to respect their privacy, to know they may not feel comfortable telling me everything. They may not want to discuss things. There may be things things that are traumatic for them or not comfortable, and just respecting their boundaries and their privacy there.
That's really beautiful, Charlotte. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially in terms of we're talking about these spaces where refugee background people might be leading a lot of changes. That doesn't mean that it's their responsibility to share everything. As much as they do want to share, and really being respectful of that. It's really, really beautiful.
Yeah, definitely.
Gosh, it's been such a lovely conversation. I wish we could keep talking forever about it. It's really, really interesting.
I could talk about this for hours and hours.
I was just wondering if you had any positive experiences that you could share in terms of inspiring communities or people leading change in the refugee background community that comes to mind.
Definitely. So I'm really excited to talk about this. So I'm going to discuss my experience working at ETC English Teaching College with my refugee background students. So something that I do there with them is organise the student council. I actually just had it today with them at lunchtime, which was wonderful. And what they do is they lead what they want to change within the school. But a few years ago, after the terrible mosque attacks and very tragic shooting that happened in Christchurch, they actually did some fundraising as a council, and they tried to raise money for the Red Cross. So that was the students' ideas who were refugees. It wasn't the ideas of their teachers or of the school manager who was leading the group at the time. They decided to do it, and they raised a lot of money and were very proud of their agency and autonomy there. So that was a very positive example. They also help newly arrived students. When they come into school, they help with translating, and they do all of this for free. They don't ask for anything. They give up their time. Some of these students are studying English all day, working in jobs all night, and I'm just so inspired by what they do.
That's really beautiful, Charlotte. It's very emotional.
It's making me feel emotional.
Close to your heart.
But I'm so inspired by my students every time.
That is so beautiful, Charlotte. I think you're absolutely right, and especially as you say, really inspiring seeing, knowing, and experiencing all the incredible things that really humanity can do, and sort of refugee background people are just humans who've come to New Zealand who've overcome a lot more in a lot of cases than other people, but that has not stopped them in any capacity by leading incredible change, by fundraising heaps of money, just by being really, really, really incredible. Yeah.
Exactly right. I'm just so inspired by my students, and they really have all gone on to do great things within the communities. They're some of the hardest working people that I've ever met, and that's why I absolutely love working with them. So I feel very privileged to be able to work with refugees in my life and to learn from their experiences. Yeah.
Gosh, it's so lovely to share this beautiful corridor with you, Charlotte. Especially, I feel a lot of the same emotions in terms of our kind of experiences with refugee background communities, and just how lucky we are to be in this space and to be able to have these conversations and witness everything that we have.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much for chatting today. It has been a real delight for me, and I hope everyone has enjoyed the conversation. I certainly have. And I look forward to our next guests on Voice of Aroha and the next conversations we'll have, and I'm sure we'll get to experience a lot more beautiful aroha, especially coming from the people we've interacted with. So
exactly right. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. I absolutely loved it. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed, to see you soon. Follow us on social media. Bye.